imagine you're 4 years old. You're fleeing a war-torn country. You're with your family, just clinging to these fragmented memories. And then years later, you return, not just as a visitor, but you go back as a scholar trying to understand how that war is being remembered. And what you discover. The stories, they're incomplete, maybe even misleading. And on all sides, too. And that's the powerful journey of Viet Thanh Nguyen, and it's what we're going to be diving into today. So we've got his book, Nothing Ever Dies, Vietnam and the Memory of War. And we've also got some really insightful NPR interviews with him as well to help guide us.
It's really fascinating how Nguyen uses his own personal story to examine the broader narratives, about the Vietnam War. So he was just 4 when he escaped from Vietnam. He was separated from his family in refugee camps and then ultimately settled in the United States.
And growing up, I mean, he was surrounded by Hollywood's portrayal of the war, which, let's be honest, was pretty one-sided, wasn't it? I mean, it wasn't until he went back to Vietnam as an adult that he really began to grasp the Vietnamese perspective. And that perspective, it was really largely missing, I think, from the American narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. And this brings up a crucial point that Nguyen really drives home, which are the limitations of single narratives. So, if you think about it, Americans often view themselves as victims of the Vietnam War, and they focus on the loss of American lives and the trauma that the soldiers faced.
Right, but then at the same time, Vietnamese narratives often emphasize their victimhood as well, right?
Yeah.
At the hands of foreign powers, and sometimes I think even downplaying their own actions. And both countries, actually, they have what Nguyen calls these memory industries. So you've got museums, you've got memorials, you've got films, all sorts of things. And all of these things, they kind of reinforce these very limited perspectives, don't they?
Yeah, they do. And you can even see it in something like the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in D.C. I mean, it's a powerful tribute. There's no doubt about that. But it really does focus solely on American losses. You won't find any acknowledgement of the millions of Vietnamese lives that were also lost.
And then when you go over to Vietnam, you've got the war museums there, and they often highlight American atrocities, and it almost creates this image of Vietnamese resilience, against this brutal enemy.
Yeah.
And it's just a really classic example, I think, of how each side kind of constructs its own version of history. It's its own memory of what happened during the war.
Yeah. And it begs the question, really, how do we move past these very conflicting narratives?
Yeah.
To something more complete, something more nuanced in our understanding of war and its impact?
Well, Nguyen argues that, in order to understand the war, we need to understand the influence of cultural forces, particularly things like Hollywood, in shaping global perceptions, right? And he points to films like Apocalypse Now, and these films, they're artistic masterpieces, but they can also perpetuate stereotypes, and they can really erase Vietnamese voices from the narrative.
Yeah, and it's a prime example of how American cultural dominance can really shape how a conflict is remembered, even on a global scale. And this leads us to, I think, the central tension in Nguyen's work, which is, the push and pull between personal memory and national memory.
Right. And initially, he really wanted to just tell that missing Vietnamese story, right?
Yeah.
Fill in the gaps that were left by the dominant American narrative.
Yeah.
But as he went on, I mean, his understanding of the war really evolved, didn't it?
It really did. He realized that that just presenting another single narrative, even if it was a counter narrative, that wasn't the solution. It was more about understanding the complexity of memory itself, how these individual experiences that people have, how they intersect with and are often overshadowed by national narratives too. So it's about seeing the whole picture and not just focusing on one piece of it.
And that becomes even more relevant when we start to consider the parallels between the U.S. withdrawal from Vietnam and the more recent withdrawal from Afghanistan. I mean, it feels almost cyclical, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The chaotic scenes, the feeling of abandonment, the struggle that all the refugees faced, it all evokes these very uncomfortable echoes of the past. And it really begs the question, are we as a nation doomed to repeat these patterns?
I mean, that's a heavy question for sure. But Nguyen, he doesn't offer any easy answers, does he? In fact, I think he pushes us even further to confront this concept of happy forgetting, something that the philosopher Paul Ricoeur talks about.
Now, this isn't about, erasing the past or, pretending it never happened. It's more about actively working through it. acknowledging the injustices that happen, and then genuinely striving for reconciliation. And a key part of that is making space for more voices and not just relying on a single representative to tell the story. It's really about acknowledging the complex tapestry of experiences that make up a conflict,
Yeah, I see what you mean.
And, picking up on that, we're working through the past idea. Nguyen brings up this really interesting concept called rememory. He actually borrows it from Toni Morrison's novel, Beloved.
The summary, right. Yeah, I remember that from the book. But
yeah.
How does that connect to all of this, though?
Well, think about how a certain smell, for instance, or a certain song, how that can just suddenly transport you back to like a really vivid childhood memory, And that's rememory in action, really. It's this idea that the past, it's not just, locked away in our minds somewhere. It's actually woven into the world all around us. So you have these echoes of the past that can be triggered by all sorts of things, like places, objects, even scents, like I said. And those echoes, they can really have a powerful effect on our present, even if we're not consciously aware of them all the time.
So even if we're not actively thinking about a specific event or memory, those echoes can still shape our emotions and our reactions, even our whole understanding of the world.
Exactly. I mean, think back to Nguyen's experience in that Laotian cave. Even though those teenage girls, they might not have been consciously thinking about the massacre that happened there, but the memory of it was still present, right? It was embedded in that specific location. And it makes you wonder just how many other places actually hold those kinds of unspoken histories, silently shaping all of our experiences, even if we don't realize it.
That's a really powerful thought. And speaking of powerful things, I think we need to talk about storytelling here too, right?
Okay.
Because Nguyen argues that the stories we tell and how we tell those stories, it has a huge impact on how we understand and remember conflict.
Absolutely. And he's not just talking about the official narratives either, like the ones coming from governments or institutions and stuff. He's talking about the personal stories too, those individual experiences that often get overlooked or even, completely silenced, because those voices are just as important, if not even more so, in understanding the true impact of war.
Hearing you say that makes me think about Nguyen's own family history. He talks about, being separated from his parents and brother in the refugee camps. And it's clearly an experience that shaped his whole view of the war, obviously. But he also mentions how his parents, they were really hesitant to share their own experiences too. And it makes you realize how trauma can actually silence those personal stories, silence those crucial perspectives that we need to hear.
That's such an important point, because when we only focus on that one dominant narrative, that one side of the story, we miss out on all those untold stories, all those missing pieces of the puzzle, and that's really where the power of literature and art comes in. So Nguyen, as a novelist, he uses fiction to explore those really complex emotions of war and to give a voice to those people who are so often silenced or marginalized. He sees storytelling as a way to kind of push back against those dominant narratives, and to create a much more nuanced, more empathetic understanding of conflict.
So it's not just about recounting the facts then. It's about getting to the heart of it, the human cost, and how war impacts individual lives and continues to resonate long after the fighting's actually ended.
Exactly. It forces us to ask whose stories are being told, right? And whose stories are being silenced. Who gets to actually shape the narrative?
Yeah.
And who's left out?
That's the question we need to be asking ourselves all the time. And not just when it comes to war either, right? But in all areas of life, I think. It's about being critical of the information we're given, seeking out those diverse perspectives, and challenging those dominant narratives that so often shape how we see the world. And honestly, I think that feels even more important now than ever. I mean, especially in today's world where we're constantly bombarded with information, and so much of it's filtered through algorithms and social media feeds that are designed to just reinforce our existing beliefs.
It's like we're all living in these echo chambers, surrounded by the same narratives, the same limited viewpoints. And we have to make a not just effort to break out of those echo chambers, to seek out information that challenges our assumptions, and forces us to actually think critically about things.
And it feels like one way to do that is to engage with art and literature that offers different perspectives too.
Yeah.
Right? The kinds of things that challenge those preconceived notions that we have.
Yeah.
And force us to confront the real complexities of the world around us.
Exactly. It's about opening ourselves up to those those uncomfortable truths, those stories that might make us question our own beliefs and biases, you know. It's about understanding that history is never simple, that there are always multiple sides to every story, and that understanding those complexities is key if we really want to build a more just and equitable world.
So we've talked about, the importance of understanding multiple narratives, challenging the dominant narratives, and engaging with different forms of storytelling. But what does that actually look like in practice? How can we as individuals take these ideas and make them actionable in our own lives?
Yeah.
What are the concrete steps we can take?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's something that we're going to dig into in our final segment.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, talking about how those single narratives can be misleading, how memories they can be embedded in the world around us, and the power of storytelling as well. But how do we actually apply all this to our lives, though? How do we as individuals engage with these multiple narratives in a meaningful way?
Well, it's definitely a challenge, but one of the most powerful things we can do, I think, is cultivate a sense of curiosity. A genuine willingness to step outside our comfort zones and really explore those perspectives that are different from our own. It's about embracing that discomfort and realizing that that's really where real growth happens.
So it's about actively seeking out those missing stories then.
Yeah.
The ones that haven't been given the same platform as the dominant narratives.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are so many ways to do that. It could be reading books or watching films from creators with different backgrounds or different viewpoints. It could be visiting museums or historical sites that offer these alternative interpretations of events. Or maybe it's even as simple as striking up conversations with people whose lived experiences are different from our own. I mean, there are so many opportunities out there if we just open ourselves up to them.
So it's about being willing to listen, to learn, and to challenge our own assumptions as well, right?
You hit the nail on the head. That last part is so crucial, that challenging our assumptions. Because it's so easy to just get caught up in the narratives that we're already comfortable with, right? The ones that just confirm our existing beliefs. But real understanding, it requires us to be open to the possibility that we might be wrong, that there might be other ways of seeing the world that we haven't even considered yet.
That makes me think back to that rememory concept we were talking about earlier. If those memories are really embedded in the world around us, just waiting to be encountered, I mean, it's our responsibility to actively seek those out, isn't it? Not to just passively accept the narratives that are presented to us. It's like we have this active role to play in shaping our own understanding.
Yeah. Exactly. It's like becoming a historical detective, you know, piecing together these fragments of information to create a much fuller picture of the past. And that requires us to be critical thinkers too, to question the sources of information and to consider the biases that might be shaping those narratives that we encounter.
Yeah, it's not just about absorbing more information either. It's about engaging with it critically, asking the tough questions, and seeking out multiple perspectives so that we can form our own informed opinions. It's really about taking ownership of our understanding of the world.
And that brings us right back to Viet Thanh Nguyen's core message, I think. If we truly want to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past, if we want to break free from those cycles of violence and division, then we need to cultivate a much deeper, more nuanced and empathetic understanding of the world. And that starts with acknowledging that single narratives can be limiting and then actively seeking out those missing pieces of the story.
And this doesn't just apply to massive historical events either, does it? It's also about our everyday interactions, the way we interact with people who are different from us, the way we approach conflicts and disagreements in our personal lives too.
Oh, absolutely. The same principles apply. It's about listening to truly understand and not just waiting for our turn to speak. It's about being willing to try and see things from another person's perspective, even if we don't agree with them.
Right. It's that humility of acknowledging that our own experiences and perspectives are limited.
Yeah.
And that there's always more to learn. Right?
Yeah. And it's a lifelong process, really. And at the heart of it all is empathy.
Yeah.
That ability to connect with and share the feelings of others. If we can truly see the world through another person's eyes, then we're less likely to just see them as the enemy, to resort to those harmful us versus them dynamics that we see so often.
So as we wrap up this deep dive here, I think the challenge for all of us is to take these ideas and really put them into practice in our own lives. To be more curious, to think critically, to really embrace empathy. Because if we can do that, maybe, just maybe, we can start to break free from those cycles of violence. And create a more just and compassionate world.
And remember, this is a journey. It's not a destination. There's always more to learn, more perspectives to consider, more stories to uncover. So keep asking those questions, keep seeking out those voices that are often silenced, and keep pushing yourself to see the world in new and unexpected ways. It's a lifelong process of growth and understanding.
Well said. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the complexities of remembering war. We hope this has sparked some new ideas and inspired you to continue exploring these really important issues.